Every character, location, or experience you've read about in my crime fiction novels holds a piece of reality. I'm Helen Taylor. Welcome to the story behind my stories, the video podcast where crime fiction meets my authentic experience. Here, we delve into the real-life inspirations and intimate stories that shaped my novels. Discover how my everyday encounters, adventures, and travels translate into tales as gripping as they are genuine. The story behind my stories goes behind the words on the page to reveal the backstory that inspires my writing. Hit follow or subscribe and ensure you're part of this journey. Hi everybody, welcome to episode 5 of the story behind Leith or Leith Hill. Last week we talked about Angela. She's very prominent at the start of the book because she is on the charity cycle race that occurs. And as we've talked about, I did that race the first year. It was after the Olympic road race course, which highly inspired me to do that. Before we continue on a little bit with Angela, I just wanted to talk a little bit more about me cycling and the Surrey Hills. I've done several events since where the Surrey Hills featured as my training ground. They weren't the actual competitions or races or triathlons didn't take place on the Surrey Hills like this one, but I used the Surrey Hills, but never Leith Hill again, for training because of the difficulty of the hills there. As I'd already mentioned, I hate Newlands Corner, but the majority of that is the traffic that is going up there with no pavements on either side of the road. But there is another road off of the main A25 there that is called Staples Lane, and that has a very similar route climb, but it's a single track, sort of very few cars, so it's a much nicer ride, and it takes you up to the top on a level with Newlands Corner, and then when you go down, you can go down two different ways. If you go down one way, you come out where you would come out if you came down Newlands Corner, so it's a much nicer version of that. I used Surrey Hills for training for Escape from Alcatraz triathlon, and because obviously in San Francisco the hills, loads of them, so used the Surrey Hills for training for that, and I also used the Surrey Hills for training for a cycle holiday that I did in India. But that is going to be the subject of another book, so we won't go into that anymore. So let me go back to Angela. Obviously, she is partly me on that athletic side of things, and she did first occur in my books as part of the team in Connecting Trains, where, like I've said, she went a bit rogue. But if you read Leith or Leith Hill, you will see that the team come out to support her, and the Angela from Connecting Trains, that wouldn't have happened. So I'm just going to read you a couple of excerpts which lead on into the team again, the same team from Connecting Trains, and goes into the changes that others have seen in her since Connecting Trains. Okay, so this is chapter 5. Uh, Goodwin watched Angela work, precise, methodical. It was usually a uniforms job, done before the real investigation began. A few years ago, she wouldn't have touched this task. But since her reprimand from Bowman, after going rogue during Operation Connecting Trains, she'd shifted. She realised that if she wanted to be a DI, like Goodwin, she couldn't do it alone. He liked to think he'd helped with that, helped her see that delegation wasn't weakness, and that a good manager draws strength from the team's diversity. She hadn't lost her ambition. He admired that. She was still the one he'd trust for solo work, for anything that required grit and focus. They had an understanding. She'd never stop wanting his job, and he'd never stop showing her that the team was stronger than the individual. Even when he'd been stuck investigating a murder aboard the Pearl of the Pacific cruise ship, he'd called in Penny. He needed her tech skills he didn't have. Angela had grown on the rest of the team too. The Angela Phillips who joined 2 years ago would have ridden this race alone. Back then, no one would have come to support her. She'd have nailed it for sure. But now, she valued their presence. And it was clear how grateful she was that half the team had shown up. After taping off the scene, Goodwin left Angela with the body and the dog. He was just short of the car park when Niels radioed in. So that is Goodwin reflecting on how far Angela had come from Connecting Trains. And that also brings in a little the team. So I'm going to continue. It is the same team from Connecting Trains as his investigative team. We do have a new member in the team, which I will mention shortly. So, Goodwin and Angela returned to the car park. What had been a bright, noisy, and full area was now merely Niels and a steward. There was a single white Luton van and Niels's car. The steward was talking to Niels at the open back door of the Luton van. They shook hands, he climbed into the cab and drove away. Horton came walking over to greet them, wheeling Angela's bike. She looked gratefully at him. She'd completely forgotten she'd been in the middle of a 100-mile cycle race she'd trained for and looked forward to for months before this all happened. Niels reported into Goodwin. All clear, sir. Everybody checked out with Horton and Penny. They've all been let go. The stewards have packed up and they've all gone, and we have all their details too. There's nothing more for us here now. Goodwin looked around the car park. It doesn't look like Fletcher, our blood-soaked witness or offender, nor our victim, arrived by car. No, but then this has been closed off since 5 a.m. this morning when the marshals arrived to set up, responded Niels. There is another car park on the other side of Leith Hill, slightly nearer the tower, but with the steeper walk up there to the top. But I don't expect anybody was planning on visiting the tower today. All the roads around the top of the hill have been closed, added Horton. I believe there's another entrance on the far side too, sir, informed Angela. But from the sounds of things, maybe they walked. So yes, that is a possibility, Goodwin agreed. Definitely for Fletcher. But for our victim, we don't know enough yet. He turned to Niels. Let's wrap it up here. I'll give Penny a ring. Maybe we can have her check on the victim before we leave. Then we'll move back to the station and start setting up the incident room. They all nodded. No one was thrilled at having their Sunday turned into a murder investigation. No one argued either. Goodwin had built a strong, solid team, one that worked well together, trusted each other, and knew how to get the job done. He was a fair boss, and he made sure they were compensated for the unsociable hours they often pulled. The fact that Steve Payne had peeled himself off the sofa and gone straight to the hospital without a full-blown moan was proof enough. If anyone was going to complain about working on a Sunday, it would be Payne. Goodwin pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed Penny. As always, the line had barely rung before she answered. "Sir?" It never failed to amuse him. "Contact Penny electronically, by mail, direct message, or internal system ping, and you'll get a response almost before you hit send." Her laptop and phone were somehow synced, so she only got alerts on whichever one she was using at the time, usually the laptop. He imagined her flat full of unopened post, envelopes stacked in neat, untouched piles by the door. Penny lived in the digital world. Paper was still an afterthought. Still, when it came to solving murders, the team worked best with a physical murder board in the incident room. Most of their cases were rooted in the real world, not the virtual one. Angela and Horton were digital natives, quick with tech. And if you remember, they're the younger ones, graduate. Niels and David Dean were a touch older, more analogue in their habits. Not a great deal, but a little bit more. Goodwin, Graham Hall and Steve Payne were firmly in the old school bracket. Goodwin was learning, adapting, getting there, just not as fast as Bowman would like, but he was trying, and he had Penny. So you can see the sort of team dynamics. They all sort of gel together as with complementary traits and skills. You see, I mentioned Payne there. He's still on the team. Nobody else would have him. If you've read Connecting Trains and now Leith or Leith Hill, you will. Payne does come up. He is one of those team members that is a pain. But he gives insight again in this book. He gives insight, and also the team are a lot more together in this book. A lot of the book is based at the station in the interviews, and each of the teams mix and match for the interviews. So they each work with each other. And again, the way they work is very much complementary with each couple, and Goodwin picks them specifically for what they may or may not create or bring up in the interview. So Penny actually does some interviewing in Leith or Leith Hill, and she goes in with Angela because they have sussed that one of the suspects very much talks to women. That does come back to bite them, so to speak. But yes, so it is the same team, and this team will continue at least for the next UK-based one. And the international cases are branching out to include or be based around maybe a team member with support for Goodwin, purely because he can't do all these international things. So the next book, Don't Die For Me, Argentina, is Penny and Goodwin. And then this is a very sneak peek of later in the year. In Leith or Leith Hill, you find that Niels has had a baby, which shouldn't be too much of a spoiler from Connecting Trains, where he was trying, or him and his wife were trying for a baby. They had a baby, and the book that's coming out at the end of the year, which is 2 international books' time, is Sleighing in Lapland, and that will be Niels taking his child, who then will be 3, 4-ish, to Lapland, and that's where that case is going to be set, and it will be Niels will be the forefront member of the team in that one. So that's the sort of team dynamics. They've been working together now for several years, and everything that came out of connecting trains has been worked through, and they now work very well together as a team. And there's a couple of bits in the book where they're joking and banter and things like that within the team. But Angela is very much the athletic one. And later in the book, there is a mention of running and a very fast time, and she's naturally impressed by that. And maybe you could comment or contact me if you think, having read it, that Angela and this person who ran very fast would actually make a good couple, and whether she would go that route. So there you go. There is, for podcast listeners only, a shout out to contact me if you'd like to influence where that might go in a future book. So then I do introduce a new periphery member, if you like. So not in the actual investigative team, because that team's there and they're gelling through the series. But I had been asked by my biggest fan, who is also a friend, if she could appear in a future book. And so I brought her into Leith or Leith Hill. And the actual, at the front of the book, the dedication is Wendy Brown, who tirelessly listens, she'll be listening now, watches and reads everything I do, more importantly loves it. You want it in, you are FO', which stands for Felicity O'Connor. And Felicity O'Connor is a new character that I have brought in. She needed to be in this, and then after Wendy asking, I have taken traits of Wendy to be this personality in this book. So I'm just going to read you where she appears in the book. Felicity O'Connor, flick to her colleagues, raised a finger. She's fine, and you are too, but... She stepped forward with fluid precision, her gymnast's balance, letting her lean past her centre of gravity without disturbing the scene. She handed Angela a pair of blue sterile gloves and an evidence bag. I know it's not the same, she said gently, but it will preserve any potential evidence. Flick stroked the dog soothingly. Then she bagged her own gloves. Nothing would be missed. The dog waited patiently as Angela slipped the gloves on. Then, crouching, she held its head in one hand and stroked the top with the other. Goodwin asked Flick for another evidence bag and nodded towards Angela. If she'll let you, we need the collar. That might help us ID the victim. So, Felicity O'Connor is... where is it? the forensic pathologist who's turned up with her Socko team. Now, the forensic pathologist works on behalf of the coroner. And so she appears a little bit more then while they're investigating the scene. And she does appear later as she does the autopsy, again on behalf of the coroner, and reports back to Goodwin then, and then Goodwin asks her for some other information a little bit later. So she is a new character who will come up in future books, but I wanted to tell you the history and basis of where she came from. And so it's the same team, and you can see that Angela has grown and understands the team, and that Goodwin, maybe a little bit with the international cases being less on him, he's not stepping back, but maybe he is just giving a little bit more space to the team. Maybe he's preparing for Bowman's job. Maybe he's going to be a DCI. Who knows? But that's what I wanted to chat about today. It was the team, and they're all still there. Giving you a little bit on Neil's there, a little bit on there's a little bit of dynamic between Horton and Angela in the book. They were almost competitive rivals in connecting trains because they joined the team at the same time and they're both of a similar age. But they're very, very different now. And Horton, I mentioned in the book, is coming to the end of his graduate training bit, and he's wanting to stay working with Goodwin, and Goodwin is hoping he's going to choose to stay and work with him. So at the moment, the team is exactly as it was in Connecting Trains. David Dean is taking his sergeant's exams. Steve Payne is still the one that knows everybody and trying to he used straight away at the beginning. He's happens to be friends with the sister at the hospital, so he's still grumpy as hell and doesn't like one of the suspects and suspects him big time from the very beginning. Niels, as I've said, has had a baby, and I do think it is important, even if it's a thriller and a crime thriller, it is still important to have that experience and background characteristics of all of the team members, so that one, I can utilise them, like I'm utilising Angela in this, and I'm going to utilise Niels in the other one, and Bowman takes a bigger part in the next UK-based case. But I do think it is important to have them. My books are very character-driven, and so you do need to know the characters. So hopefully you can see in Leith or Leith Hill those characters have developed, and next week we're going to talk about the other new character. I say character. We're going to talk about the dog. There is a dog, but spoiler alert, the dog does not get hurt or injured or killed or treated cruelly at all. It's not one of those types of books. But the dog is key in Leith Hill, and I have had dogs at various times in my life. So that's the story behind the story of Leith Hill with dogs, which we will do next week. So I hopefully will see you then. Have a good week. Bye.